one of the illustrations. I'm putting it out there so he can write it. But to tell you a little bit about him, he's from Greenwood, Mississippi. Okay, he's staying up here with me. He's a Mississippi State University graduate. And one of his favorite quotes, I think it's on here. One of his quotes that is actually my favorite. Where is it? This is what happens when you write your notes, but then you can't understand it. Okay, I'm going to read it to you. I began to draw when I was a very young boy. I say this because I can still remember my dad giving me the church bulletin during church services for me to draw on. I think this was to keep me quiet. I had everything I needed to learn how to draw: a pencil, a piece of paper, and a long-winded Baptist preacher. Many an artist got their start as a child while learning to draw in church. I was also given that bulletin, so I could relate to that. He has illustrated more than 50 educational booklets, and they've been published all across the country. I want to thank y'all for coming, and I would like to introduce Mr. Chuck Galey on up.
Oh, good. We got questions. Okay, well, thank y'all for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it on a Thanksgiving week. It's very good that y'all could come out and hopefully enjoy our time together. As you mentioned, I did grow up in Greenwood, and I did get my start in church. It's ironic we're in a church setting here. And my dad really did give me pencils and pieces of paper to draw just to keep me quiet. And I thought that was a good way to start, and I think a lot of artists have begun that way as well. But I'd like to thank Stacy for inviting me to have an exhibit here. LaQuentin Holliday was our fabricator there, the exhibit fabricator, and Jesse Valentine, of course, for the tech help and audio visual. So, growing up in the Delta, so many people ask us, why is there so much talent coming out of Mississippi? And I've often wondered that, and this is a fine example, this museum. When I walked in the first time to deliver the exhibit, I felt like I was on the shoulder of giants. I think that's an important notion to kind of think about for young people to come into this museum and see people that look like them, that have done well in the arts. So, let me see if I can get this to work today. So, creativity in the Mississippi Delta. I've got a theory about that, and it's kind of a personal theory about growing up in the Delta, and I'll describe it for you. First of all, we're going to have a quick lesson in design, okay? So, in design, we have a blank page. And then we have a line across the page with a line vertical. Now, this is the most boring design you can have. This is just boring. It's stable, no action. There's nothing going on here. It's just boring, okay? So think about this design. It's just very stable, nothing going on. Then, let's look at some other designs. Here we have our blank piece of paper, but yet this time we have almost a mountain range, perhaps. Lots of angles, lots of things going up and down, okay? Lots of activity to keep the eye moving all over the page. And this is an exciting design, what I would call exciting. So let's look at some art as an example. Now here we have Van Gogh's Starry Night. Lots of activity going on, and I've come back in and put some red lines to show the basic elements. And so we have a page full of energy, full of design, full of things going on. And then this particular one's a beautiful alpine photograph of the Tour de France making their way through a mountain pass. So you have a lot of energy going on there. Again, no straight lines there. Okay? So a lot of energy. So when you live in the delta, this is what it looks like. So why is there so much creativity coming out of the delta? So the question is, how can that be? I think growing up in this landscape, which would affect you mentally, but as a child, you look within to create, okay? So as a child, you create your own world. And so I'm going to reduce it just to the lines, okay? So we have this straight line. So in other words, you start to create your own world to live in and to play in and to live in. So I think that's a theory of mine as far as living in the delta. And it's a lot of fun to think of it that way, but I'll hold to that. So I'm going to show you just a comparison of all three. And so there you have a little bit of an idea about why there's so much creativity coming out of the delta. Let's see, did I put that right? Yeah, ecology. All right. So growing up in the delta, what do I want to do when I grow up? I want to become an oceanographer. Because I got to scuba dive. We learned how to scuba dive in swimming pools, right? So that was the ocean to us. So I worked at, I didn't think you can I'd always been in art. I'd always messed around with it, but I didn't think you could make a living at it. So ecology back in the early 70s was a big word. We call it global warming now, but ecology was the big word back then. So I went to work. I actually studied physics in college, for crying out loud. So I went to work at the research lab in Ocean Springs, all right? So we'd go out on these cruises, work boats, and we'd anchor for 27 hours. And the worst thing was I got seasick all the time. 4-foot waves, seasick. But the determining factor was one day we were using our scientific piece of machinery that you would swing a boom out over the water and lower it into the water to test water temperature, how much salt is in the water, that sort of thing. And, out there near Horn Island, there's a lot of gnats. We call them no-see-ums, sand flies and whatnot. And my supervisor was there swatting flies, just going like this. And that boom would go, so something had to happen. So he was swatting flies and said, Chuck, go over there and get me the WD-40. So I went over there and got this can. I was young. I had no idea what WD-40 was. So here he was swatting. And so I proceeded to spray his legs with WD-40. That was the determining factor for me to go back into art, because what was I doing out there? Anyway, so that is an interesting story, but it's absolutely true. And the other guys on the boat, of course, they howled at this because they had been harassing me all day. Anyway, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about influences. And I've asked a lot of you who are from Meridian whether you knew this fellow or not. His name is Edgar Parker. Okay, you do? Great. Okay, good. Edgar Parker was born in 1925 and passed away in 1982. He grew up in Meridian here. He went to high school. He was kind of sick as a young boy, but he learned how to sketch animals, and he learned how to sketch. He took to art just very, very nicely. He really was good. He went to the University of Alabama, and his professors there said he needed to go to New York to learn a little more with some painters there. And that's what he did. He was in New York City working, and he became an illustrator of children's publishing. So this particular catalog that was presented as the Mississippi Museum of Art did a show on his work back in 1985. And my wife and I, Forrest, went to this show, And I'm just blown away by his work. Beautiful, beautiful work, which you'll see in a second. But he was another influence that I had of work. See if I can get to the next part. It should come up in, there we go. Edgar Parker's artistic influences, okay? Edward Lear was a very strange man. He was a British wit back in 1800s, and he did silly cartoons. Here he is, Mr. Lear goes out walking with Polly and the cat. So back in the old 1800s, that was kind of a new thing for them, and these three characters would get in all kind of trouble. And so that whimsy and that fantasy was very influential with Edgar Parker. So Beatrix Potter, of course, we all know about Tales of Peter Rabbit and all these other wonderful, wonderful stories and books. But wonderful thing about Beatrix Potter was that she animated her characters and made them look almost alive, and very much like regular human beings in her stories. And that was an influence of Edgar Parker's as well. I'm leading up to the fact that these two people influenced Edgar Parker, who influenced me. And I believe that, here we go, with Edgar Parker's art. This is thank you to the Mississippi Museum of Art for giving me permission to use these pieces of art, but as illustrations. But he worked primarily in black and white with graphite and ink wash, black and white. And in the 50s and 60s, they were starting to use color in children's publishing, but black and white was also popular. These are so beautiful and so exquisite. I just fell in love with them because they show a lot of the character as well. And plus, they're very well dressed, don't you think? So what kind of whimsy, what kind of a mindset comes up with a skink that wears a winged collar and a bowler hat? And let's see the next one. This is one of my favorites as well. This is called Wharf Rat. Now, clearly, you could see some Beatrix Potter coming through here, right? And so all of that put together really influenced me as well. Here are some of his books that he produced or published. And you can see that these are 50s and 60s publishing, kind of an older way that we have fancy color nowadays. But he taught at the Visual School of Art, also in New York as well. Let's see what else. Okay, so as Edgar Parker and Beatrix Potter as influences to me, this is what I came up with. And you can see him out there in our exhibit. And so the animation of these characters and the costuming, the anthropomorphic qualities of them, taking on human qualities perhaps, was a lot of fun to do. Someone in our discussion today there at the exhibit said sometimes it brings out a question within the viewer. The viewer will bring a background or a backstory that says, I wonder where that bug is going. He's got tickets, and he has a suitcase, so I wonder where he's going. And I think he's a salesman. And this little character is just doing some skating. And now this one is funny because my first book that I illustrated, a children's picture book, they wanted to see sketches. They wanted to see what you would do. So I sent this jazz cat down to New Orleans to the Pelican Publishing Company down there, and they loved it, which got me that gig, So I did a little research and created this character. And so then you get jazz cats from that. Now, notice I don't, these are not like your pets at home. They dress nicely, these cats. And that's what's so much fun, because it adds character to them. It lets you know a little more about them as a character. This Color Kittens is the book I grew up with. I didn't grow up with a lot of books, but Color Kittens is one of my favorites. And it's about these cats. It's a little golden book. We of an older set remember them. They are these cats who walk around the town mixing up colors and painting, okay? So I fell in love with the color because it was just so much fun to look at those bright, bright colors. And we had cats when we were young as far as pets, and so it was a lot of fun to look at that. Now, I will tell you this story about when I talked about this book in a little library in Bienville Parish in Louisiana. And I talked about the colors, and I talked about the, how the cats can mix up colors, and, we could turn a page and say, what do you get when you mix red and blue? And they would say, purple, purple. What would you get when you mix, how do you get orange, red and yellow? And one little boy raised his hand and he said, when I pee in the toilet, it turns green. And of course, I howled at that because, number one, it was a funny little boy, 7-year-old who, 7-year-olds, right? But he was observant. That's what art is. He was observant. He could see that with a blue toilet water, there's the color mixing going on. But anyway, it was a lot of fun to go around to libraries and talk about art in that way. And so, some of my other influences, of course, was Chris Van Allsburg and Bill Joyce, who has gone on to direct and create animated movies. David Wiesner, this guy's 3-time Caldecott, that's a big fancy Oscars of children's publishing for illustration. And of course, Jim Henson, we all know who Jim Henson and the Muppets are. Big influences for the whimsy and lots of fun with that. So now I wanted to talk a little bit about the process, if you will let me. This is my drawing table. I'm working with, someone asked the crow quill, and there it is right there next to the brush. Crow quill pen, and you can see the line variation is really cool when you can draw with a crow quill pen. And many of the art pieces out in the display are crow quill with watercolor. And this is kind of where it starts, just to get some ideas down. These days when I receive these emails these days, but back in the 90s I received 2 pages of words for a picture book. So I was going to talk to you about one particular page in Rock and Roll Dogs. And I will now recite that word. Let me see if I can remember anyway, it's where they go to eat. The blues, the Rock and Roll Dogs, they play in Memphis, Tennessee. They play rock and roll. So here you go. The blues fountain is the scene to make. They serve sausage sodas and liver shakes. Eat all you want, because it ain't rude for a big Dalmatian to wolf down fast food. You're all welcome, so trot up their path. You kids can visit, but don't say bath. The canine quats, rowdy pups, they toss them hush puppies to shush them up. So here are these dogs that play rock and roll in Memphis, right? So what do? That's all the words an illustrator gets. And you got to think up words. You got to think up an illustration. So I kind of require myself to do 10 thumbnails. And these are about 2 inches by 1 inch, but I've enlarged it, of course. And I do 10 just to kind of get past that obvious design, okay? And I chose, I believe, number 5 right here. I do 10 of them just because I'll have a choice then, of what's the best design. So I'll choose number 5 and I'll enlarge it for you. So you see it looks very rough, right? Almost like a stick figure. And that's good because these took a minute to do. And that's all I don't want to have to think about it or become precious with it. I just want to get a design down. So then I started my research and started doing drawings. And I did research on dogs and what they look like and how to make them look like a human being, kind of like that. So I did more and more research, and this is called in watercolor a value study, where you get the darks and lights. But then, if you're a third grade class, I'll always ask, what is missing? So, what is missing? What, Ellen? Color. Thank you, Ellen. Color's missing. So, I always have to go back and do a little color rough, okay? And now, watch closely. This is where the magic takes place in the finish. Watercolor done. Unfortunately, this piece, aftermarket, we call it aftermarket sales, where somebody who collects children's literature wants to buy the original, and fortunately somebody did, and I was happy to sell it to them. But so it's not in the exhibit. But it's watercolor, and this is the way it looks in the book itself, which are, by the way, I think they have some down in the gift shop, I believe. And so this next one is about these dogs who ride motorcycles across the lawn. So there's the sketch, and here is the finish. Now, some kid will ask me, well, do you ride a motorcycle? I said, no, I just looked at a lot of pictures. And that engine that you see right there is not accurate whatsoever. I invented all of those little gizmos in there to make it look like an engine, like it. Now I know Selena, who actually rides a motorcycle. I don't think that looks like your engine does on your motorcycle, does it, Selena? Okay. Anyway, so you invent things when you do illustrations. And here is the cover. And I just wanted to show you this cover just to show you how things change during the editing process. See, he's dancing one way, and then it turns out they want him to do something else. Now, I also thought it'd be fun to take a look really quick at just rough drawings. This one is in the exhibit. This is called Buoy Bird, and this is how it started. This was a little 1 by 1 inch thumbnail, and I wanted to show you how it ended up. Just keep sketching, and then it turned into a nice little illustration. And then I think I have another one, I believe. Yeah, one of my favorites. Just a little boy looking out the window with his imagination, and I did a little color rough. And then it turned out looking like this, and that also is in the exhibit today. So it's a little bit of an imagination going on there, which is a lot of fun. And if you were to go into my studio today, that shelf pretty much looks like that today as well. So anyway, I think that the main thing I like to do about illustration is to have the opportunity to be creative. And in children's illustration, in children's literature, it's really, really important to have that fantasy part of it, okay? But I'd like to kind of conclude today by reading to you one of my late friend's poems. It's called 20 Minutes a Day by Richard Peck. Read to your children 20 minutes a day. You've got the time, and so do they. Read while the laundry is in the machine. Read while the dinner cooks. Tuck a child in the crook of your arm and reach for the library books. Hide the remote. Let the computer game cool, for one day your children will be off at school. Remedial, gifted, you have the choice. Let them hear their first tales in the sound of your voice. Read in the morning, read over noon, read by the light of goodnight moon. Turn the pages together, sitting close as you fit, till a small voice beside you says, hey, don't quit. Thank you so much for letting me come and talk to you today. Thank you. Thank you. Now I think we got some time for questions. I'd be happy to answer. No questions. Oh, there's one. Okay.
Hello, hello.
Yes.
Thank you so much for that. It's wonderful stuff to hear. But how long does it take you to illustrate a book?
That's a good question. I actually timed it one time, one of the books. Takes me, for like the rock and roll dogs that you saw, it was 20 hours for one. And then you multiply that times 17 paintings per book. So over 300 hours, over a 6 to 9 month period, okay? So not all in a row. So my day will be, ideally it would be 4 hours in the morning working on a picture book, and then 4 hours in the afternoon perhaps working with some other client work. I will say I've done hidden pictures for highlights. Y'all know that feature they have? I am one of those artists that have been so mean that I hide those things that you cannot find them. In fact, about 3 or 4 years ago, there was a young lady from Virginia who emailed me on her mother's email and said, "I can't find this object. Where is it?" And it was a piece of art that I had done in 2001. So what am I going to do? But fortunately, I keep my sketches, and I knew where about that sketch was. So I looked in my filing cabinet and found the sketch and looked for 2 hours. I thought I had forgotten to put it in there. But I finally found it because I was out of practice or something. But I didn't tell her exactly where it was when I emailed her back, but I told her in the vicinity of where it was. But those, the highlights things took about an hour or two to do. But there's a good example of a parent who was on the ball and gave that permission to her daughter to email the artist and to find out for herself, which I thought was pretty cool. But to answer your question, a little over 300 total hours, but when you look at some of the publishings done today, they're done lots quicker. It depends on the styling. In this case, I put a lot of watercolor in there, didn't I? Very, very, together. So yeah, but there it is, and I think I work a little faster these days, but that's on an average. Well, when I was in Greenwood, my parents saw that I liked to do art, and they gave me some art lessons with a German art teacher. Her name was Mrs. Wacht. W-A-C-H-T. My brother Bill will attest to this. Ms. Wacht, Ms. Lenny Wacht. Anyway, but here's the deal. Lenny would teach in the afternoons after school in her studio adjacent to her house. But she was from Germany back in the 30s when they immigrated back, during the Nazi takeover. They immigrated to America, her and her husband, right? But her formal training was European, and she served tea at 4 o'clock. And she played classical music during the lesson. So, my goodness, where do you find that in the Mississippi Delta? But then I went and did my 2 years getting seasick. And then I went back to Mississippi State and finished in their art program there. And the rest I've worked with ad agencies, and I've been freelancing artwork since '85. So there's the formal part of it, but a lot of it is just plain old work. Yeah. Anybody else? Oh, Selena. I can't wait. My library friends are here today, and I do appreciate that. Thank you.
We've always got questions.
Yes, that's great.
A lot of times when you have a talent like that and you do it because you enjoy it and then you make it your career, it takes some of the joy out of it. You don't enjoy it because it's your work now. Do you draw or practice art for yourself not for work, just so you can keep the joy in it still?
Yeah, there, on occasion, I kind of go in fits and starts with a sketchbook early in the morning to try to just draw haphazardly for an hour, just whatever's in my mind, whatever. You know, when you wake up, you're not really awake yet. So if you try to draw for an hour and just see what happens, and a lot of good things have really come out of that. In fact, the little girl out there with the beret and the big Christmas gift, she came out of that sketchbook. And so a lot of times you draw, forgive the pun, you take out of your sketchbook ideas that have come to you in that way. Now, I will say, you know, the little whale with the bouquet of flowers, did y'all see that? Now, I rendered that in digital, but that idea was from a little boy in Saltillo Elementary School who came up to me after I had done a program there, and he gave me this little pencil drawing of a whale with a bouquet of flowers. And I'm thinking, an adult wouldn't have thought of that, right? So I enhanced it a little bit, gave him a little top hat like he's going off a courting somewhere, you know. But that little boy just gave me that inspiration to do that. So a lot of times the joy will come from just giving work or presenting to children and just getting that back. They give back more than I give them, I think, sometimes.
There's someone with a question, but I want to do a shameless plug. On December 4th, he's coming back to do a workshop with children. So come back, sign up your kids. Just had to do that.
That's a Saturday from 10 to 12 on that day for kids. Yes, ma'am.
My question is, what is your favorite illustration that you've done so far?
You know what? That's a great question. I will tell you this. I've shifted styles a little bit. I've come away from digital, like the whale you've seen. I've come to the crow quill, like you saw the picture there with crow quill and watercolor. And that style is starting to really appeal to me because you can change the line width, and there's art things that go along with that, but it's a lot of fun. But the illustration, I would think, would be the little girl with the beret, with the Christmas gift, and then the girl walking the dog. Because somewhere, somehow, that appeals. Maybe some people say it has warmth to that. I'm not sure what that means, but then some people say that it has a lot of life to it. And that's what you want with your art, to get people to respond to that, and it's compelling in a way. But as far as your question goes, I would say those two illustrations are my favorite. And I just did those last summer. So, I mean, you're always growing and trying new things. And that's kind of where I am right now. So there was someone else in here. Yes, sir.
So thanks very much for that talk. That's great.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
So I wanted to ask about the digital workflow, and perhaps you just answered it, and I'm not sure I picked it up. So the first two objects out there that we saw were digital prints. And then there's a lot of watercolor, croquis pen, and all that. So what I wanted to ask about was what the direction of your workflow was, whether you were headed toward digital, and I think I just heard you say you're headed away from digital.
Yeah, I am. Because, I'm sorry, are you
it's
finished?
It's not an interruption. I'm finished.
Are you finished? Okay. So I think the digital was fun to do. It's kind of quick because you don't have to mix colors. You're doing digitally. And I use a Photoshop kind of software. It's called Painter, but it mimics watercolor. It mimics pastels and so forth. However, what I'm learning in the art is where is the soul of the art? The digital, you can illustrate nicely and color it nicely, and the subject matter can be interesting, but where is the soul of it, and what helps people respond to that? And I think that the line art of a croquis pen with some watercolor that you can work with some textures and so forth has become a lot more appealing to me, because I think it has a lot more to offer as far as the viewer goes. And I enjoy doing that a little bit. I feel more like an artist at that point than I do with the digital. Although, it's perfectly fine, it's not the programs are not like you push a button, you actually have to draw on the screen and that sort of thing. But that, I hope that answers your question. Okay. All right. Someone else, perhaps? Oh, good. There's another one. Thank you.
I'm just interested in the publishing process.
Okay.
And when you're doing it all on your own, you're not illustrating someone else's book from start to finish, you know, just that process.
So maybe I understand your question. If you know, in other words, if you're writing and illustrating, okay. You know, I used to think that it would come, and this is the ego in me, would be thinking that a story would come from an illustration, but really it comes from the germ of an idea that a character in a picture book, perhaps what would that character want, and how would they overcome some things to get what they want. So to illustrate it, there's this marriage between the two, and I think that if you can create the energy that's in the heart of that story with those illustrations, then you have some good. It's kind of an alchemy in a way. It's very hard to do sometimes, but I hope that answers your question. Maybe does that help? Okay, can you repeat that again?
I'm just really interested in the process of publishing.
Oh, publishing. Okay, all right. So what you're doing is, once you have a portfolio of art or a story and or both, what do you do then? Okay, great. Okay, now I understand. There is an organization called the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, scbwi.org, and that's a great way to, you sound like you're familiar with it. Are you?
Not really. I've heard of it.
Okay, great. That's a great teaching tool. It's a teaching organization that publishers kind of adhere to, and they pick up on who's doing really good work, all right? So ultimately, you send off your manuscript and a book dummy, you know, a little mock-up of the book, maybe digitally these days, off to a publisher, and you know, you do a little research in a bookstore to see what kind of books are being published by what publisher, and find someone who matches your kind of story, and that's the publisher you send off to. Now, it's kind of simple, it sounds like, but it's a little bit of research to figure out what publisher fits the kind of story that you do. Like perhaps if it was a religious story, perhaps some sort of something to do with motivation, maybe. Do you find those publishers that publish that kind of topic, and especially in children's publishing? Does that help? Okay, thank you. Well, good. Anyone else? Oh, there's my brother, yes. Yes, sir. There you go.
You spend a lot of time working with schools.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about what the animals that the children create are marvelous?
Yes, I do a lot of teaching artist work with schools. I'm on the teaching artist roster with the Arts Commission, and that's where like a teacher or a school will ask the commission to fund my visit to them. And what we talk about is children's characters, children's stories, all kind of things that the kids are learning. They're reading a lot of stories in class, but yet they may not know there's an actual person behind those stories as far as who creates those. To them, it's just a book, all right? So if you were to talk to them about the illustration part and also talk to them about the writing part, if they can kind of create their own stories, I think that helps them in their schoolwork. That's my ideas anyway. I'm hoping that's why they asked me to come into the school in the first place, to talk to them about that, about writing. And I've gotten thank you notes from teachers, and you know, where the students will send a thank you note of something they drew or something along those lines, similar to that little boy with the whale. But yeah, so it's very important to me to be able to talk to the kids about writing and illustrating, because I think they become better students that way. If they become a lifelong reader, that's even better. Yes. Is that what you were going to say, Deborah? Okay. Thank you. Yes, Miss Ellen.
And I want to thank you.
There's the.
I want to thank you for traveling all over the state and
Yeah.
Louisiana and touching the lives of children, because I heard a Caldecott Award-winning artist say that was the thing that changed his life, was an artist going to his school.
Yeah, and that's
So
true.
we're proud to have that,
Yeah,
Chuck.
thank you. Let me put a plug in for Miss Ellen Ruffin here, who is the director of the Grumman Children's Literary Collection at USM. They just celebrated Curious George's 80th birthday about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and they have all those papers and all that story of the HRAs coming across in Europe after Nazis were chasing them and so forth. They have the papers, the original drawings, papers, the whole bit. So many other artists that are in that collection, including myself, we contribute to that collection because we know it'll be taken care of. All right. And I would suggest, if you're interested in children's publishing, just curious. If your name is George, that's even better. Sorry, it just came out. But anyway, if you're curious about that sort of thing, then Ellen's the one to talk to, because you can ask for, in fact, you can go online, right, Ellen, to see who they have in the collection. Probably some of your favorite authors and illustrators may be in that collection. You can go look at original work, original sketches, correspondence from the publishers, correspondence from agents, and so forth. So, ma'am, I would suggest, if you're interested in publishing, that would be a good place to go as well, just to research it, because it's a lot of fun to go there and just see what they have. So thank you for that question. All right. Anyone else have a curious question? Looks like we're done for the day.
Okay, well, if no one has anything else,
Stacy.
we're actually going to do a book signing
Yeah.
down in our museum store. If you're not familiar where it is, you actually passed it when you entered in. It was off to your right. So if you're interested in that, we have 2 of Chuck's books in our store. So.
Yeah. Jazz Cats and Rock and Roll Dogs, I believe.
Yep.
One of the ones that I showed up here. So.
And
thank
both are up in the exhibit.
Yeah. So join me in the bookstore. It'd be great Christmas presents. Let me plug that. Get your Christmas shopping early. Thank you.